So, welcome to this virtual theology chat with the Anglican Women's Studies Centre. We're very pleased this evening to welcome two women from Christchurch, Jess Hall and Bridie Boyd. And the topic of their presentation is the theology of the womb. Jess is an art maker, a book collector, and a theological thinker. Her love for theology grows daily as she seeks to discover the fingerprints of the divine on all aspects of life. She holds a Bachelor of Theology from Laidlaw College and is currently pursuing postgraduate study at the University of Otago. She's also on the staff at Laidlaw College in Christchurch as the campus librarian and administrator extraordinaire.
Kia ora, Kieran.
Kia ora, Jess. And Bridie Boyd, Bridie Marsden-Boyd, we're delighted to have her. Bridie's strictly on leave, having got a brand new baby, but she's a counsellor with the Anglican Women's Studies Centre. So thank you, Bridie, for being with us this evening.
Thank you.
Bridie says she's been a proud advocate for women for many years, having run workshops on the feminine divine, raised up young women to leadership in the church, and has been a delegate to the United Nations Commission on the Status of Women. She has a strong passion for theology and she's a perpetual student. So she also lives in Christchurch. So welcome. And I'm going to hand this over to Bridie and Jess.
Kia ora, welcome everyone. We actually thought we would begin this evening with prayer. And so Jess is going to lead us in a litany to honour women from the Book of Common Prayer.
It's written in full in the actual text of Theology of the Womb, but I'm just going to read an excerpt from it this evening. So, a litany to honour women. We walk in the company of the women who have gone before, mothers of the faith, both named and unnamed, testifying with ferocity and faith to the spirit of wisdom and healing. They are the judges, the prophets, the martyrs, the warriors, poets, loves and saints in the landscape of our dreams. We walk in the company of Deborah, who judged the Israelites with authority and strength. We walk in the company of Esther, who used her position as queen to ensure the welfare of her people. We walk in the company of you, whose names have been lost and silenced, who kept and cradled the wisdom of the ages. We walk in the company of the woman with the flow of blood, who audaciously sought her healing and release. We walk in the company of Mary Magdalene, who wept at the empty tomb until the risen Christ appeared. We walk in the company of Phoebe, who led an early church in the Empire of Rome. We walk in the company of you, mothers of the faith, who teach us to resist evil with boldness, to lead with wisdom, and to heal. Amen.
Amen.
Cool. I'm going to kick us off. We're going to jump straight in. This is a really surprising book. I did not expect to come across it when I began my 2022. I found it very, very thought-provoking, and for me personally, it stimulated so much insight and just curiosity about what else I might understand better going forward when it comes to my body and God's created intent with my body and what the body means. What the heck does this body mean? So Bridie and I are going to start off with summarizing the essence of the book. If you've read the review, awesome. If you haven't, that's okay too. I think we'll cover off most of the main ideas to empower us for discussion afterwards. So this book, I have it here. It might be small if you've got gallery view on. This is an awesome book. It's divided into 3 sections. Section 1 of the book, which the author titles Waiting and Growth, she focuses on the menstrual community. So for her purposes, that's women who bleed, who have a monthly flow. And the 2 key ideas that I think she really focuses on is this paradox between the everyday reality of being a woman who bleeds, and also seeking to elicit something of the deeper reality of being a woman who bleeds. So for her, the everyday reality is that stuff that we're all very, very familiar with. The shame, the feelings of shame around having a period, the hushed secret tones with which we speak to our girlfriends when we needed a pad, got caught out. The author muses that she finds it so funny that she still speaks in those hushed tones even when she's like in her 40s. There's a behavior that kind of persists throughout life. She talks about rites of passage, aka those maybe awkward stories that your mother or a grandmother or an aunt told you about getting your first blood, and trying to explain it and hoping to still instill dignity, but maybe failing. So that the everyday reality of having like intrusive blood in your life, and just what that's like to hold and navigate, especially in like social circumstances. It's filled with lots of really funny anecdotes about things that we can all relate to, like getting a blood stain on your pants, like right on the day that and during the time when you're like in a, I don't know, church event and your crush is there. Just those little personal things that make us cringe. And then she unpacks something of the deeper reality that she sees sits behind having a period. So it's stuff like the incredible way that menstruation connects women. It's an embodied experience that so many of us share. And just like the anecdotes I shared before, there are stories that we have in common, even if we've never met, even if we live in different places. She talks about the creation and life potential that sits behind certainly the biological reasons for having a period. So this idea that like our bodies are constantly in a cycle of like opening ourselves up to making something new. And the author writes that this is a really like special thing that we share in a small way with God, who holds it in a larger way. That we're constantly coming to that nexus of like creating and holding the potential for creating within ourselves and living with that and stewarding that. Of course, there's also the dual task of holding things when they die, and there's kind of like different ways in which she tracks that idea throughout the book. So it might be small things like when blood comes, you start bleeding in a season where maybe you were hoping not to bleed because you wanted to get pregnant, and so that's kind of like a little death, or scaled all the way up to larger deaths. Another thing that she unpacks in this like deeper reality theme is some of the history of interpretation around Levitical law, which I'm sure we're all familiar with, this idea that in the Old Testament tradition, in the Israelite community, that there were rules around and practices for navigating spaces of cleanness and uncleanness. She provides like a different interpretation of that terminology, where she wonders if it might be better to interpret this language of being unclean as having more to do with the presence of spiritual death as opposed to like sin or tainting. And so then she unpacks this idea that when we are undergoing a menstrual cycle, we're passing spiritual realities through our body. There's a spiritual reality of the potential for life, and then there's the death that ensures if we're not pregnant or for whatever other reason. So it's really just kind of cracking open like, what could be the spiritual dimension of having a period? What more could we understand about it? And then, oh man, the piece that like really blew my mind She starts unpacking this idea of bloodshed for life, that women are constantly shedding blood in the pursuit of creating something. And that might be physical or non-physical. And that this blood that we shed is a symbolic echo of, for her, two other places where blood was shed for life. We've got the crucifixion, classic, blood shed so that we may have life. And there's also the genesis of the incarnation, where Mary's body is broken in labor and bleeds to give Christ his embodied life in the world. And so for Bauman, partaking in this monthly ritual of bleeding is quite literally a visceral ritual of remembrance. There's the opportunity to recall like something of the deeper reality that we have access to because of what God has done in our midst. Whoa, first section. We're off to such a strong start. Bridie, do you want to jump in at this point?
So the second section delves more deeply into the body parts that we hold as women, as part of the menstrual community, and as birthing people. And so she looks specifically at breast, vagina, and womb. And this section is all about creating and birthing. And as Jess has already said, that doesn't necessarily mean of a child, because some of us who have wombs cannot have children, and some of us who don't have wombs are still women. So it's the idea that we have this kind of center of ourselves, if you view your womb as your center, and from that can spring creativity, and that could be a physical life form, but that could also be ideas, ministries, books, paintings. And there's, when we create and when we birth, there's this interesting kind of disconnection where sometimes we birth life, but also sometimes we end up birthing death. And this can be through stillborn or miscarriage, but it can also be when, as leaders of community, as kind of matriarchs in community, we might have to carry a community through seasons of death and allow ourselves to birth traditions that actually are just encouraging us to grieve. There was a really interesting question in the chapter on breasts, which is, what is the story that your breasts can tell? And that was a really new concept for me. I'd always been quite embarrassed about my breasts. I'd always felt they were the wrong size, too big or too small. And they didn't do anything until very recently when I started to breastfeed my firstborn. So they just kind of were this extra thing that were a source of objectification. They often made me feel uncomfortable because I wasn't sure who was looking. And then if it was someone who I wanted to look, I felt shame because maybe they didn't look the way that person wanted them to look. So these are stories that I hear many women also saying. It's kind of a commonality. We don't have a great relationship with our breasts a lot of the time. And so she really encourages us to re-examine this. And one of the interesting concepts she brought up is bras. And I think for a lot of us, bras can be quite uncomfortable. We really look forward to taking them off at the end of the day. And there's that whole like free the nipple movement, which, you know, I always get great enjoyment from. But she kind of said, maybe if we look at it more as like a breastplate, and what does that mean? And she went right back to the ancient priestesses who would actually put on a breastplate as a symbol of justice. So can we, when we put on our bras, actually be engaging in some kind of spiritual moment where we're putting on the symbol of justice now? And I found that a really fascinating concept. And then when she began her section on the vagina, she looked more at how it is a canal between death and life, and that is deeply, deeply spiritual. That ability to move from one realm to another is incredible, and is something that we need to view with perhaps a lot more preciousness than we tend to. And both of these sections, she did also look at the objectification and the kind of the downsides of having breasts and vaginas, and looked at how through the kind of distortion that we often get in pornography and through media about how something is meant to look or meant to behave, we lose a lot of the sacredness. And she brings up the high level of concern that she has that we don't see these things as sacred and actually swing it to an opposite, where the way that they are viewed is actively harmful to women, and that we as a society perhaps need to do a lot of healing around that. Which was fascinating, and I think she's pretty on point there. One thing I found to be a bit of a struggle with her work is she very much had the association of men only watch pornography, which we know through statistics just simply isn't true. But that was kind of my only real flaw with this particular section. The rest of it kind of really wowed me, and I look forward to hearing from those of you who go on to read this book how you found this particular segment. So when she came to the womb, she talked about the hardship that being a womb bearer brings. You can have a lot of pain by having one that works, and also a lot of pain by having one that doesn't work. There's pain in birth, but there's also a lot of pain in miscarriage, stillbirth, being unable to conceive. Simply the presence of one means pain. But it also can mean resurrection hope, which was a really fascinating concept. And she writes that we have a choice to respond to our Creator, whose heart is beating more loudly and wild than ours, to continue to bring life where there was death. So each month we build up the tissues within us and then we expel them. So we literally create life, the tissues, and then we get rid of them, in that cycle. So that happens on a small level every single month. But then there's also the bigger level where we can get pregnant and then lose the child and then go on to have subsequent pregnancies and continue to engage in the concept of bringing life where there has been death. And that as women, as people who kind of engage in that creative process, there is so much pain, sorrow, and grief, but there is also all of this creativity and life and love. And then lastly, I've lost my point. Lastly is kind of the overall body of woman is one that is very nurturing and comforting and brings comfort not only to our children, but to our partners and our communities as well. And she again talks about breasts as, while they're something that nurture our physical children, they're also something that can nurture our partners and provide them with a place of safety and satisfaction. So there's sort of lots of layering to a woman's body that allows the theology of the womb and that connection of God's love to come through and to be seen. And I really love that. Back to you, Jess.
Cool. So you can really get a sense for how like thematically throughout the book she sort of scales up pieces of the female body, like up into like the way God moves, and the things God deals with and holds. So everything from like the menstrual cycle up into the cycle of the womb, up into the cycle of the body, up into the cycle of death and resurrection and salvation and eschatological hope. It's really quite stunning. In the third section, while she's already reflected on times when we hold and birth death throughout the book, in the last section, dying and burying, it's called, she really focuses on I guess like the death at the very end of the womb cycle, so thinking about menopause, and then also thinking about menopause as a resource for our earthly life ending, so death in the proper sense. So it's like these pieces of death that we hold are like little foretastes, I suppose, of the embodied experience that we have at the end of our lives. And in this section, she does something quite interesting. She again scales those cycles of the body up into liturgical life and makes a whole bunch of connections between them. So let me explain what she means by that. So she sees that in the menstrual cycle, for example, there's a season of waiting, the follicular or ovulation phase. There's a season of creating, the menstrual phase, and there's a season of burying, the luteal phase. And similar with the womb, we're scaling up. We've got puberty, where the body is waiting, refining the tools needed to eventually create fertility. But then fertility comes to an end, and we have the season of menopause. Scaling up again, we've got the liturgy of the ordinary days in our calendar, where we're getting through, and we're waiting for those points in the year that are theologically particularly rich. So we have the creation season, which is Christmas and Advent and Epiphany, where we're celebrating and we're new life has come. We're remembering the birth of Christ. But then we transition from a creating season into Easter, where we observe Lent and the events of Holy Week, and we mourn the tragedy of Christ's death. But then, like at the very end, we kind of get the glimpse that it'll start all over again. We will have the creation again. We will have the new life. We will have the resurrection. So this cycle just continues. It shows up everywhere. And so she says, and she really wants to challenge us that death is a part of our Christian story. But for us in particular, it's not life to death, it's life to death to life again. That is the hope of the Christian community. That's what we're hanging out for. And death is a part of our Christian story, but death is also a part of our body story. Our menstrual cycles come to an end. They die in a small way. The functionality of our womb comes to an end. It dies in a small way in menopause. Our very bodies come to an end in a larger way when our lives end. But then we have life again because of what God has done and because of salvation. So she sees that the way that the body, the female body, interacts with death, the way it passes through death and then back into life again with each new cycle, like that's a resource for Christian hope. That's a reminder of like the bigger story that we hold close, and that fuels our ministry, fuels our life force. And I think that's really truly what it means to say that the body is a site of revelation about God, that like this body is the canvas upon which I can look for pieces that remind me of like why I'm here and what God's on about, and what's happening at that deeper level. Awesome book. Cool. Let's take a deep breath. We've said a lot of things. We've had a lot of ideas. We're going to kickstart the question discussion time. So Bridie and I thought that we would bounce some questions between the two of us to get us going. And then we'd love to invite you to share stories or reflections, or answer some of the questions that we've prepared as you wish to, totally as you wish. So Bridie, first question for you. What resonates with you about these concepts in this book?
I think two things resonated with me. One was how much deafening silence there had been in my life up until this point from the church, from my own theological education, about how much God has been involved in my body, and how much I can feel the connection between myself and my creator and what my body can do. And then it kind of brings me into the second resonation, just how much I can actually learn from my body. Until this book, I'd always kind of heard the image of God and assumed it was something intangible, that yes, I was very much made in the image of God, but this didn't really connect to my physicality in any way. Whereas even though I don't agree with every part of this book, the overwhelming bit that I really loved is that all of these pieces of me, these really physical organs, actually teach me so much about God and about how I am made in the image of God, that my ability to create is so deeply entrenched. It's in my physical blood and flesh. And it's not just an intangible spiritual thing. It goes into the physical world in a very rich way as well. So Jess, same question. What resonates with you?
I think there's a piece that stands out in particular, and Bridie hinted at it before, this discussion that the author conducts about like sexuality, about sexual intimacy, and the author muses about the beautiful power that that good sexual intimacy can have in the community, the way that sex has the potential to edify a relationship, and that flows out into how that relationship is present in the community and what kind of love is modeled to the community. I thought that was so beautiful, and so I think the thing that really resonated with me about the book is how my body can edify the community. It's not just something that me, myself, and I curate and fuss around with in the morning, putting on makeup and wearing clothes that I like. There's a real sense in which my body has a function and a blessing to bestow upon the people around me. I loved that. That was awesome. And I want to think more about it. Yeah.
So on the flip side then, Jess, what made you uncomfortable when reading this book?
I'm not, yeah. There were definitely pieces. You said Bridie about there's a little bit of what feels like a demonization of the role that men have to play in embodied life. That was definitely heartbreaking. I think while there is this invitation to consider how your body impacts the community, there was definitely a very strong emphasis on individual embodied life. I think it could have been a bit more balanced, and it made me a bit uncomfortable that her approach, her tone was solely focused there. I thought that was a little bit of a blind spot. Yeah, I don't think there was very much that made me very, very uncomfortable. Yeah, what about you, Bridie?
I think one thing I had as an awareness when reading the book is, although she does herself say that you don't have to have a womb and don't have to have reproduced in order to kind of engage in this theology, she didn't really create space for women who have chosen not to have children, or for women who can't have children. And I felt that was kind of a deep sadness, and something that probably should be addressed at some point. If we want to have a theology of the womb, it needs to encompass everyone who identifies as female. And what does that need to look like? And then the other thing that made me uncomfortable comes from my own kind of upbringing and culture. So I was very much raised with kind of an English background. So talking about menstruation, just you do not do it. So when she was kind of encouraging maybe having sermons on it and things like that, my first thought was oh no, you can't do that. And then I had to look at, why was that my first instinct? Why am I so uncomfortable talking about something that basically half the people around me go through? Why is it some kind of dark secret that I don't want to talk about? And then the role of, is this a conversation I only want to have with women? But actually it needs to be a wider conversation that includes men as well. So where is the kind of the boundaries of these kinds of conversations? At what age is it appropriate to start talking about this kind of theology? And is it just something we should be doing right from birth up, where it's just not a big deal? Or is it something that needs to have a bit more importance, where there might be kind of a coming of age ritual or something where this now becomes part of the communal conversation? So those two things definitely made me a bit uncomfortable. I think we'll do one more question between Jess and I, but then I think we'd really love to start getting more of you into this conversation. So if maybe, one more question, and then we might halt the recording so that all of you who wish to can feel free to speak. So last question is, Jess, how do you think these ideas might inform how we build community and how we disciple women?
I don't know. Can you say the question again? I'll just really soak it in.
How might Bauman's ideas, the concept of the theology of the womb, inform how we build community, but also how we disciple women?
Well, I'll do the latter first. How we disciple women. When I think back over like my life and how I've been discipled as an individual, I wish that there was more integration between like spiritual realities, like vocations and spiritual gifts, that there was like more of a connection between those things and the body that I'm in. I think we very easily slip into this dualism where we make all of our Christian pursuits the invisible things that we can think about in our brains or hold in our hearts. These like intangible pursuits and postures and attitudes, and we don't often explicitly connect them back to the people that we are. And I certainly believe that like there's got to be a reason why like I'm in this body. Like this body needs to be an equal and total, like totally true piece of Jess. If I didn't have this body, I wouldn't be Jess. Like that's something that I want to make more and more real in my life as a conviction. And so I think I'd like to see us disciple women in a way that accounts for the physical presence that we hold. I don't know what that looks like, but I want more of it. As far as the other piece was something about in the church or something, Bridie.
Yes, but I can take that one if you would like.
Oh, you go. We'll share.
So in kind of when we think about building community, I don't think many of us consider the theology of our bodies as part of that, but perhaps we could or should. And so one of the ways where I think this idea could build community is creating active space for more creativity. And when we think about creativity, there is the birth aspect of that, when you actually produce the thing and bring it into the world. And that can go right through from crochet, like Deva's doing, to kind of coming up with new ministry ideas, new services, and creating those and then kind of birthing them into your community. So I wondered if some of the language that we use around women's bodies could also be put into ministry a little bit more and normalized in that way. But then also just having that acknowledging the creative process is deeply spiritual, and doing that a lot more in our community with that intentionality behind it. I'm going to check this back to Kieran now to stop the recording, and we'll start the discussion with you all. Oh, microphone, Kieran.
So just before I stop the recording, I'm going to thank Jess and Bridie very much for their insightful and animated retelling of this book. And so I'm going to stop the recording now so that we can go on.